Hi, I'm Norman Pirolo. I'm a furniture maker at Pirolo Design and a woodworking educator at WoodSkills. And today I'd like to provide some my insight into the craft of woodworking and maintaining woodworking as a hobby. So in light of recent videos of mine of converting the hobby of woodworking into going professional and converting it to a business, there are some huge benefits also to maintaining it as a hobby, and I'd like to talk about that today. I'm Norman Pirolo from WoodSkills, and I'd like to talk about a few woodworking books I've written. My recent book is Quiet Woodworking in an Unquiet World. It talks about my movement to hand tools, from high-tech to low-tech, a woodworker's journey, which chronicles my journey from my former high-tech career to my current furniture making career. Along with that, I offer courses through woodskills.com. The courses range from a basic woodworking course right through to furniture design and a comprehensive design and making course. All books are available in both print and digital format. Before I converted my hobby of woodworking into a business, I did maintain woodworking as a hobby for quite a number of years. Enjoyed that period considerably. One of the main reasons that I converted to a business was an opportunity arose. I had been creating certain products. In my case, if you've looked at any of my previous videos, I have videos on my box making journey as an example. So because I was successful in creating some high-end jewelry boxes, the opportunity arose for me to convert my hobby into a business, and I talked about that at length in my earlier videos. Along with that, my furniture making journey into a business of creating furniture, either commission-based furniture or spec-based furniture. So that worked well too. But let's take a step back and talk about woodworking as a hobby today. Woodworking is an excellent pursuit of creativity. It develops your hand-to-eye coordination, it develops your manual dexterity, it develops our brains. It allows us to perform calculations, work with some arithmetic, give thought to the process of creativity. It causes us to make, which is, if we go back centuries and centuries ago, our forefathers were instrumental in making almost everything they owned. So it maintains and brings back the tradition of making, which is very rewarding in itself. So most importantly, it keeps us off the computer. And we all know that today most people spend considerable amounts of time on a computer. It allows us to move into a different environment to create woodworking crafts or woodworking objects. So this is a benefit in itself in light of today's computer environment. To start with, maintain a positive attitude about learning. Very, very critical to be open to learn from others that have gone down the same path, the woodworking path. Maintain the attitude and understand that you know very little if you're just beginning, and the next person knows considerably more. They've experienced more at woodworking. And in my case, I'm a woodworking educator. I've had 30, maybe 35 years now of accumulated woodworking expertise and experience and knowledge to share with others. So you have to essentially respect the fact that there are other people out there that are more knowledgeable about woodworking, and the attitude is to accept their knowledge and allow them to share their knowledge with you. There will be good and bad experiences in woodworking. The bad experiences are projects don't succeed, things don't go right, you've cut boards too short, and so on and so forth. Things don't go right. Parts are incorrect parts. The aesthetic of a furniture piece you created isn't quite right, so you spend a lot of time and effort into creating something that isn't satisfactory to you. But chalk this up to experience. It's a good experience. It's a bad outcome, but it evolves into a good experience. When I began, I had considerable number of failures in my first, in my case, small boxes. They were very, very, compared to what I made later on, very crude and kind of poorly made. But I was happy at the time, and I didn't know any better. So I only found out through other woodworkers and through participating in craft shows through a guild I belonged to early on. that my product was inferior to everybody else's similar product. So that was an experience, and I persevered and I moved on, and I eventually developed a far superior product because I challenged myself with learning. The two F's of woodworking are frustration and failure. We'll all be faced with frustration when we start. I went through a considerable amount of frustration in learning techniques and feeling overwhelmed with the amount of knowledge I had to learn, all about joinery, wood selection, how to even finish an object or a piece of furniture or a box, where to even start, what type of wood to buy, what type of tools to purchase. When I began, this was almost pre-internet. There was very little information about any guidance about woodworking. It was mostly through books and magazines at the time. Today you have access to a considerable amount of information that could help you or guide you along much quicker, so you can evolve into a successful woodworker much faster. A hobbyist woodworker, I should say. So you will be frustrated, you will experience failure, and my advice is to just keep going, persevere. Failure, determination, and perseverance will make you grow as a woodworker. Through my failures, my frustrations, I became more and more determined to learn the craft correctly and to persevere. And this allowed me to grow as a woodworker over a period of decades. And I look back at my early days of woodworking, and I hardly knew anything. And when I began to take classes and study cabinet making at a local college, and eventually studied at a dedicated furniture school, all about designing and making furniture. But before that, it was just essentially trial and error, and struggling with woodworking concepts and what I could glean from books and magazine articles. And the classes, of course, helped considerably. The program and the projects within the program helped considerably in the learning experience. So you need to learn to cope with the limited knowledge you have as a hobbyist woodworker, how to deal with that. My advice is to either fast track your knowledge through some classes, either in-person classes or online classes, and I offer online classes, of course. Read books on woodworking, that's still a very effective way to learn woodworking. And of course some magazine articles, but that's slowly disappearing. The online classes and in-person classes, and of course YouTube videos are beneficial to actually learning woodworking in today's environment, in comparison to decades ago when we had no internet and everything was done through books and either magazine articles or in-person classes through a dedicated woodworking program. Also, tap into experts. When I use the term experts, I preface that word experts with valid experts, and there are countless number of woodworkers on the internet today, specifically YouTube, that have only learned woodworking very recently, and they're out there teaching woodworking. They're not quite sure of what they're doing, and from what I've seen, they're struggling it within themselves, and they're anxious to actually just talk about what they share with their experiences to date. But I would be cautious about where you get your information from, especially on YouTube, and try to find a person that's been at it for quite a number of years, that has acquired the experience and expertise and has actually taught woodworking. And these are the people that have the most knowledge to share, and they actually know how to share the knowledge. If you're interested in a certain woodworking topic, try to view as many videos as possible. Try to determine which of the presenters in the video is the most knowledgeable. Typically it will be somebody with an extensive background in woodworking, provide myself as an example, and not somebody that's only learned woodworking in the last year. Essentially, it's better to learn woodworking correctly early on, and that's one of the reasons I stress attending in-person or online classes, because you learn the basics, and it's important to understand the basics before in a sequence before continuing on with more advanced topics in woodworking. So learning woodworking is a continuum. To use that old expression, learning woodworking is a marathon, not a sprint. So expect to spend years and years developing techniques and learning and really understanding woodworking and not to rush into it too much. Now, I understand the first projects you'll work on will be very basic projects, and this is good because you need to reward yourself and gain that confidence early on about creating woodworking projects. But eventually, you'll delve into more complex projects and try to advance your skills. And so it's best to learn the fundamentals early on in your woodworking journey. The best method to learn the woodworking fundamentals or basics is through a guided online program, or in-person classes, or through good books, or following an expert on YouTube, possibly. Back to the main topic of woodworking as a hobby. Be wise about tool purchases. Often less is more. We all get caught up when we start out that we assume we need a whole series of different tools and a variety of tools, and of course the manufacturers of tools and the retail outlets will convince us that we need all the different tools to actually perform woodworking, but this is not so. In my experience, and other experienced woodworkers will all tell you the same thing, that you don't need as many tools as you think you need. You can start off with a very few basic tools and work up from there. You need to really understand the tools you need for the projects you work at, or you intend to complete. As woodworkers, we don't all need the same tools. It depends on the path we've chosen within the realm of woodworking. So if you're creating small boxes, you can work with smaller tools or smaller equipment. In my case, I actually, when I began, I worked predominantly or mostly with machines. And it's the way I was trained early on in cabinet making, with some hand tool work. But then I eventually, over the decades, I've switched completely to hand tools. I still use machines. I perform sort of a so-called hybrid woodworking, which combines some machines with, but I quickly move on to hand tools, and you can see all the hand tools behind me, and I have far more hand tools on other walls and other sections of my workshop here. So I tend to focus on hand tools, and if you work with hand tools, you don't need as many hand tools as you see behind me either. You can work with very few hand tools, and I have another series of videos that talk about hand tool woodworking and the planes you should have. And when you're beginning woodworking, if you decide to go the hand plane or hand tool path, so keep this in mind. Purchase as few tools as necessary, only the minimum or the mandatory tools you'll need to complete some projects, and this will have you gain an understanding of the next tools you need. So, and always purchase the best tools you can afford if this will be your main tool. Something I've learned, and it's an old expression about purchasing the wrong tool and having to purchase it 2 or 3 times. When if you purchase the correct tool, it's only a one-time purchase. It's painful at that time, but then of course you forget about the purchase, and you're very happy you purchased that more expensive tool. And this advice holds true more so with hand tools too, because there's so many hand tools out there, and you really need to separate the marginal hand tools with the better hand tools. And everything you see behind me is higher quality. And I've learned that along the way. I've sold off my marginal or my lower quality tools and kept the high quality ones, the ones I intend to use for decades, and a lot of them I have used for decades. So it's a testament to how wise a tool purchase can be if you invest early on in the tool and maintain that tool for decades. So purchase only the wood you need. That's another trap that novice woodworkers, when they're beginning, fall into. They seem to think they need all kinds of wood, but what happens is you'll purchase wood, and then you'll find out that projects really need a different type of wood. So you're stuck with an inventory of wood that you'll probably never use, or you think you'll use but you never use. And I've got caught up with this myself. I have a whole inventory of, just an example, of bird's eye maple that I fell in love with 25, 30 years ago, and I was using extensively in all kinds of projects, figured woods, specifically bird's eye maple, and I've moved away from bird's eye maple since, and I use tiger maple and that sort of maple more recently in some furniture, but I've totally moved away from bird's eye maple. So I have a good inventory of bird's eye maple that I need to sell off at some point, and this is one of the pitfalls of acquiring wood inventory early on. When purchase the minimum, purchase only the wood you need for that particular project, and then work from there. Purchase the next set of woods for the next project. Always maintain a small inventory. until you're established, you understand the type of woods you need, the hardwoods you need. So we evolve as woodworkers, and our early work is not indicative of our future work. So I began as early on as a box maker, and I don't make boxes any longer. I moved on to furniture, and I talk about this in my journeys, and I talk about this in several of my books, specifically this one, From High Tech to Low Tech, my journey from box making to fine furniture. So we evolve, and I mentioned this as a good example of how we evolve as woodworkers. So the work you do today as a novice woodworker, as a hobbyist woodworker, is not indicative at all of what you'll be doing maybe in 5 years. You'll probably progress through and create more complex work, involve dovetails, more complex joinery, larger components, larger pieces of furniture. So keep that in mind. Start small, start with smaller projects, of course, and work from there, essentially to challenge yourself. You will be challenging yourself over the years. If you're dedicated and passionate about woodworking, you'll want to learn new techniques, new forms of joinery. You'll be tackling larger projects as a hobbyist woodworker, or just simply focus on smaller projects. It depends on the woodworker. So in the realm of woodworking, we all follow different paths. You might be content creating small boxes and charcuterie boards and small decorative objects, or you might quickly tire of that and want to move into creating furniture, which I did essentially. So keep that in mind. Again, start with small basic projects just to learn techniques, just to learn some forms of joinery, how wood is put together, all about dimensional stability in wood, which is a large factor in understanding how wood moves. And this is probably one of the points that most novice woodworkers fail to understand early on about wood movement, and how you don't want to really capture any wood and join any wood together that will tear itself apart later on in the project. So a successful completion of small projects is a form of reward and validation. So go ahead and work on small projects just to reward yourself with the knowledge you've acquired to date and validate that knowledge through that project. And this is important because it maintains the enthusiasm, and it brings enthusiasm into your woodworking. You'll want to progress from there. So it's important to have completed small projects to be able to move on to larger projects. The worst thing you could do is start a large project and have it fail and lose interest in woodworking because of it. So it's better to just start with smaller projects. Make a box. Box involves all forms of miter joinery, for example, or dovetails or rabbet joinery. And putting wood together is critical. It's the most critical part of woodworking. So you have to learn the basics and the fundamentals of how wood goes together, the joinery, selecting wood, dimensioning wood, the thickness of woods. Work yourself up to more complex projects, as I've mentioned. This could take a period of years, so don't rush it. Be comfortable with the smaller projects and slowly increase the size of the small project and to scale it up to a larger project, and that seems to work, that formula. Now we'll talk about how woodworking can become an obsession. We're all wired differently. Woodworking became an obsession for me early on, and I was totally immersed into woodworking, and I had to learn everything, and I studied woodworking for years, and I pored over books and magazines, and when the internet came out, I of course tried to glean as much information from the early internet, whatever was available out there. It could, in your case as a hobbyist woodworker, you could become slowly obsessed with learning woodworking, and this is a good and a bad thing. A good thing is it fast tracks a lot of your knowledge and your dedication and your enthusiasm of woodworking, but it also can cause burnout and cause you to not like the hobby any longer because it's taken over your life. So the important thing is to pace yourself and maintain the enthusiasm, work at woodworking, but not have it interfere too much with the rest of your life. So it can be overwhelming when starting out, all the knowledge you need to acquire, all the techniques, and just watching videos of other woodworkers perform woodworking tasks is overwhelming because they seem to have, you'll find everybody seems to be more knowledgeable than you, especially when you're starting out. You begin to realize how little you know about woodworking when you're starting out as a hobbyist. But persevere, maintain the determination, and slowly work yourself up through the projects, as I mentioned, and learn about joinery and try to study and learn about the woodworking fundamentals. This is critical because if you understand the woodworking fundamentals through some online learning or in-person classes or even books or watching experts on YouTube, you'll be much further ahead because understanding the fundamentals apply to small projects, larger projects. Wood movement is a factor in any scale of project, essentially, and joinery too, for that matter. And I spent considerable time early on trying to learn how to create dovetails, and it was frustrating at first until I sat down and sat at a workbench and just dedicated days and days to learning how to successfully create dovetails, both through dovetails and half-plane dovetails. And of course I studied some of this in school, and that helped considerably. It involves practice, is what I'm saying. You need to sit down and sit at a workbench and practice all forms of joinery. It's very rare that you'll find somebody that successfully completes, let's take for example a dovetail joint, successfully completes a dovetail joint the first time. So it takes a number of retries to be successful at different types of joinery and putting wood together and making sure everything's square and learning how to test for square and preparing wood and understanding grain orientation and selecting wood for a project. So many factors. So again, it could very well be overwhelming, but just pace yourself and understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you need to learn everything and you will get there. So I would say within a year or two of woodworking, continually creating projects, smaller projects of woodworking, you'll be much further ahead than when you began. And this is a good indication of your evolution as a woodworker and how just apply that formula and think of yourself 2 years down the road from there and how much more knowledge you'll be accumulating. And this goes on and on. If I look at myself, I've been at this, I started in the 1980s woodworking, and I still have my very first project here in my workshop. But then not continually, but I really started in earnest in the 1990s, early 1990s at woodworking, and I've been woodworking ever since, both part-time and full-time, and I chronicle this in my books, and I talk about it in earlier YouTube videos. But I've become a dedicated woodworker and furniture maker because I'm passionate about it, and it's challenged me, and I've learned considerably. I've met numerous people, numerous like-minded woodworkers in my journey that have, and we've had good discussions about woodworking, and I've joined local woodworking clubs and groups, and that's something I would also recommend if you're starting out. Join a local woodworking club or a group, and then attend meetings and try to talk to other woodworkers and maybe visit with other woodworkers that are further ahead in the craft than you are. They usually have presentations at these guild meetings or club meetings, and you can learn from there too. So there are so many methods to learn woodworking today that there's really no excuse not to learn woodworking if you're passionate about it. It's something that takes a little time, unless you fast track your knowledge through classes, dedicated classes like I mentioned. So get back to woodworking as a hobby. Woodworking is a very immersive and solitary activity. You'll find yourself getting immersed in acquiring all that knowledge I've just talked about, and it's considerable knowledge you need to understand to be able to even create your first project. And it could be immersive because you're overwhelmed with understanding and learning unless you attended some classes, and then everything is paced better because you've attended the class. And it's also woodworking is a very solitary activity. You find that you're working by yourself in a workshop most of the time, unless it's a shared space. In my case, it's definitely a solitary activity. I've been on my own as a one-man shop for a number of years. I had some help along the way in my business when I was a box maker, but I slowly moved away from that, and I do commission work and spec pieces now. And woodworking, my role as a woodworking educator involves basically working by myself. So that explains the solitary activity. So there's nothing wrong with that. You'll find that you can actually focus better on the task at hand in an environment just by yourself. At least that works for me. So it's both immersive and the solitary. To keep that in mind, that this is how woodworking is for the most part. And most woodworkers understand this. They're comfortable with the fact that they work or need to work alone most of the time. So you don't really have anybody around to bounce ideas off or to ask any questions. Unless you're working in a woodworking shop or a business and have mentors around. But for the most part, you'll be alone. In my case, it's helped me a lot to actually take a step back and understand concepts and tasks and give thought to sequences in woodworking. I'm easily distracted with people around, in my case, so it's helped me a lot in that sense. By the solitary activity, I'm alone and I can focus on everything, and I work much better and much faster in that sort of environment. And I'm sure as a woodworker, as a hobbyist woodworker, you'll find the same possibly, or for the most part, or from talking to countless hundreds of woodworkers that work by themselves, they seem to all indicate the same thing. So pace yourself to maintain the passion. Don't rush into more complex projects. Keep the project simple at first as a hobbyist woodworker. Understand all the concepts, or try to understand concepts and fundamentals at the very beginning. Learn about joinery, wood selection, how to put wood together, how to keep the project from destroying itself through wood movement, how to finish the project, which is almost as important as creating the project. Apply finish, I should say. Pace yourself in that regard. Try not to do everything at once. It's a long road to understanding everything. You'll be much further ahead in a year or two of if you've been creating projects regularly. You'll look back at your first projects and you can't believe you actually did that, because your second or third or fourth project are so much more improved. So you'll find the improvement, your skills will improve rapidly at the beginning, and the early projects will look fairly crude compared to anything you've developed later. So it's important to maintain a balanced life, to control the hobby. What I mean by that is to maintain a good work-life balance, a hobby-life balance. If you have a family and other people that depend on you, try to keep the number of hours in your woodworking hobby, control the number of hours, and not get totally obsessed with it and overwhelmed and spend more and more time. Because it's very easy to get carried away when you're in a solitary environment of a workshop, and time just flies. I can't believe how quickly time goes by when I'm working on a project, developing a project, or preparing components for a project, and you'll find time just vanishes, and before you know it, you've forgotten about it, everything else you had to do. So it's important to keep a check on the number of hours you spend in a workshop. Well, I've talked about gaining knowledge through in-person and online classes, so fast track your knowledge through classes. I can't emphasize this anymore, but it's important to gain the fundamentals, learn the fundamentals, the basics of woodworking early on, and this will accelerate fast track your journey into woodworking. So eventually move away from woodworking plans. You'll find that at the very beginning, as with most woodworkers, we work from plans because we don't really understand how to design a project, or it's much easier just to work with plans that somebody else has developed. Just purchase the wood and put it all together. This is an excellent form of learning, because you still need to create the joinery and even understand how to translate a plan, convert a plan into a furniture piece or a wood object. But eventually you'll find you'll begin to move away from woodworking plans, and you will begin to develop your own designs, and either furniture designs or objects you create in wood, the medium. This is what I did. I hardly ever worked from plans, actually. Maybe very, very early on, I built a couple of workbenches from a magazine article in the early 1990s. I still have the workbenches, but I've slowly moved away, and I use some plans for guidance, but I modify the plans considerably, I find. But I eventually moved away from any of that, and I design almost everything myself. I just have to look at a photo of something, and I can reverse engineer that photo into an object from all the experience and expertise I've gained over the years. And you'll find this also even as a beginning woodworker. As the years go on and months, you'll want to design your own projects. Another advice I could give is to continually practice and learn. practice is so important in woodworking. There are hardly any woodworkers that learned everything right off. Even creating dovetails is an example. It takes weeks and months of practicing to really be successful at creating dovetails, to understand how to put a dovetail together without too many adjustments or tuning, and to understand all forms of joinery, how joinery is put together, how woods are put together. So it's important to practice and learn through small woodworking projects, as I mentioned earlier. Also, always be conscious of safety in woodworking safety. Always be conscious if you work with machines, always be conscious of how quickly you can hurt yourself with a machine. Namely table saw, joiners, routers specifically. So try to understand how to run the wood through a machine, specifically a router, what direction you should be running the wood in, how to use a table saw to avoid kickback and injury to your fingers. Really try to understand this. I can't talk too much about this now because it's a whole subject in itself, and I do talk about this in my own online courses. I really stress the safety component of woodworking. So it's very, very important because you want to spend years at this as a hobbyist woodworker. You want to spend you'll be passionate and you want to spend a lot of time woodworking. So the worst outcome you could have is to become injured, and it puts a complete stop to everything. And then of course you'll heal and you need to restart everything, or you might get discouraged and never start again. So it's important to maintain a focus on woodworking safety, and I can't emphasize this more. Take a step back from every operation you do and try to understand if it's a safe operation. Even if you're working with hand tools, with chisels, never have a hand in front of a sharp edge. There's so many rules and guidance to using hand tools even. They could be dangerous. Not as dangerous as power tools or machines. And next is to never assume you know everything. I've been at this for 35, even 40 years, and I'm still learning today. I've expanded my library of woodworking skills over the years. And for example, veneering, I spent months and months understanding how to really perform veneering well, how to sculpt wood, dovetails, putting wood together, designing furniture. There are so many facets to woodworking. Never ever assume you know everything, because you'll find that you absolutely don't know everything. All the more knowledgeable and more experienced woodworkers will give you the same advice. It's a never-ending learning curve about just trying to understand everything about woodworking. Of course, the woodworking hobby itself, woodworking changes over the years, the evolution of woodworking. When I began, there was hardly any CNC for the hobbyist, and today it's almost common to find CNC in a small woodworking shop. I'll give you an example, the Shaper Origin, smaller CNC machines. So a lot of woodworkers have embraced this, and that's a whole learning curve in itself on trying to understand how to use these machines, in addition to all the standard machines and the hand tools. So hand tool woodworking is a subject in itself completely. You could spend months and years trying to understand all the facets of hand tool woodworking, machine woodworking and CNC woodworking. So never assume you know everything. Finally, I hope I've been able to share everything possible I could about motivating and encouraging you to follow your woodworking hobby. My final word on this is to enjoy your woodworking journey. It's really changed my life considerably. I've never been happier at woodworking. I had a former career, and if you look back at my earlier books, I talk about a 30-year career in high tech and how I completely abandoned it and moved to furniture making and woodworking. So this is testament to how successful and how passionate I am about woodworking, and you'll probably find yourself as passionate, and it will motivate you to possibly perform a career change yourself. So enjoy your woodworking journey. So please subscribe to my YouTube woodworking channel, where I share more of my woodworking techniques, my woodworking philosophy, my thoughts on woodworking, and all the challenges I've experienced, and I introduce some of the new forms of woodworking I've discovered. And also visit woodskills.com, where I have a good selection of my books, both in print and digital format, on woodworking, and all my online courses, and I also offer woodworking plans. I have maintained a regular blog on what I've got going on in my workshop and in woodworking in general. So enjoy.